Ramos and Lou in Brooklyn and New York. They were ambushed while sitting in their patrol cars. Coming from the NYPD and going to Rafael Ramos's wake, which is a couple days before Wengens, it was really eye-opening. I get chills just speaking about it because you saw people from all over the world, police patches from all over the world coming to support a police department that they make Hollywood movies about. And after the services, everyone went home, and he said, well, how do you unite people? Me and my two co-founders, Carlos Delgado and Christopher Brinkley, were just distraught. We were just beat up emotionally, and how do we bring the public and the police officers together to try to get on the same page and honor the fallen heroes and respect the public? And we came out with silicone wristbands and said Blue Lives Matter on it because every time you wore one, you looked down. You didn't have to be a cop. You remembered a hero that was killed in the line of duty, no matter if it was New York or Los Angeles. And within 10 days, we raised over $10,000. We sat down with a lawyer. We became a registered 501c3. And 5 years later, we're approaching raising $2 million. None of us make a salary. Many of us are active police officers. Some are retired. Some aren't even police officers. We don't just help the families of officers in New York City. We've helped all different states. I've become a Fox News contributor. I've gone on many news outlets, and I speak on behalf of law enforcement.
So what would you say to you personally does it mean to be Blue Lives Matter?
You know, the main thing in people, it took on a life of its own calling it a movement, and it was never meant to be a movement. It was meant to be a nonprofit, and what people don't understand who aren't police officers is the worst thing that could have ever happened. And the most similar thing would be the military and maybe even the fire department. But the worst thing for a family member is a knock on your door, a telephone call, having to be told by somebody else that your loved one's not coming home. That every single time they hear a knock or the doorbell ring or a phone call, that they always have to have that pit in their stomach that some kind of bad news is coming. And we want it to be a hybrid between a Make-A-Wish Foundation, Extreme Home Makeover. It's for law enforcement. Said if we did a surprise visit, if we rang the doorbell, if I just gave a phone call, you were able to let that family member know, no matter what they looked like, no matter what they believed in, no matter where they lived, that not every call, a knock, or a doorbell ring is going to be bad news. And you can let them know that people will always remember their loved ones. And that's what this organization is about. It's about remembering the fallen heroes who wear that blue uniform, who went out there to try to make their communities safer and gave up their lives in the process.
Right. So would you say that, so Blue Lives Matter started in 2014, right?
Yes.
Okay. So would you say, what was the inspiration behind making the name Blue Lives Matter?
You know what? I get asked that all the time, and I believe the group Black Lives Matter may have started in 2013. You know what? It was that blue uniform. It's that blue uniform that unites everybody. I call it the all-star team of the United States because people come from all different backgrounds all over the world that wear that uniform. Listen, it's common sense. There is no such thing as a blue life. But that blue uniform becomes your life. And unless you're a police officer who swore that oath, it's very hard to describe the lifestyle of being a police officer. It's not easy. The ins, the outs, the behind the scenes, sometimes even just the people you work with, the politics within. Going out there and helping and dealing with the community, that's the easy part. Dealing with the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, that's the hard part. And we wanted to let officers know that it starts from within. That if you have the support of the officers within, and of course we're speaking about good officers. We're not speaking about guys going out there and doing bad things. That's not condonable. That there's no excuse for that. But to start from within to boost morale, because there's a lot of issues that go on that are very difficult to handle as a police officer. That's why last year you saw suicides go up so high. We could discuss that further in another discussion, but that's where it came from.
Yeah. So right now, in this current climate in the United States, what would you say it means specifically to be someone that is Blue Lives Matter, and how do you think that's changed over since you've started?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that again?
Sorry, yeah, of course. So especially right now with the current social climate in the United States, how has your experience being the president of Blue Lives Matter New York City changed, and what does it mean to be someone that's Blue Lives Matter, and how has that changed?
You know what? It's not necessarily that it affects me as the president of Blue Lives. I think it affects officers in general. It's hard. It's really hard to go out there every single day and have groups of people wish death upon you, to tell you that you're not worth it, to try to categorize you. to see behind the scenes a lot of protesters go up to officers of color and berate them and talk down to them and call them traitors. And I blame a lot of media sources because they don't show the full story. They don't tell the truth of what's going on. There's a lot of misconception that maybe isn't explained on behalf of police departments nationwide. I think the term police brutality has gotten completely thrown out of context because anytime a police officer has to take police action, it's automatically police brutality, and that's not the truth. But nobody's informing the public or bringing them in to explain the difference. So if you're being fed constantly that officers are just doing bad things, you're going to start to believe it. And I don't completely fault people that aren't officers, but that doesn't mean that the narrative is true. There's a lot of bad people out there that are going to continue to do bad things, and the public calls the police officers when there's no other alternative, when they're scared, when they've already argued to the point where they're blue in the face with their neighbor, and there's no other solution. And when officers show up, you're normally dealing with the worst of the worst of people, not the best of the best. And there comes times that there's going to be physical altercations that are instigated by the individual that all they have to do is speak. People think they can't speak to officers. Officers are human. But if you escalate a situation, obviously on behalf of the officer, and people forget they're trained in escalation of force, that if somebody starts upping the ante, well, the officer's going to up the ante. So it's not easy. It's not easy nowadays. It's probably in my 15 years the hardest time to be an officer.
What would you say, like you were discussing how you think that there's a difference between what is police brutality and what the public perceives to be police brutality?
Correct.
What would you describe that to be for someone that might have that confused based on what they've seen in the media?
It's hard to say because different people view things differently. So something may not scare you, but the same situation may scare me. So it's very, very hard to go into that. But any time lately, and this isn't just in one city or one state, it's whenever someone sees an officer have to struggle with someone, automatically the front page of the paper says the officer went above and beyond and used excessive force, which being an officer, and I'm going to tell you right now, nobody likes a bad cop more than a good cop. But a lot of what's going on is false. It's if somebody's fighting the cops, it's someone's pointing a gun at a police officer, if someone's trying to put an officer in a headlock, the officer's going to have to fight back. There comes a point that a lot of boys growing up, especially myself, took martial arts. You're going to grapple. You're going to put your hands around someone's neck intentionally or a lot of times unintentionally. You're going to go down to the ground, but that doesn't mean that the officer is doing something wrong. And that's a problem because these politicians have gone so far off the ledge that the second an officer has to struggle with somebody, which a lot of times it's a struggle because officers are actually afraid to use force, they want to condemn the cop, and that's not fair. And it doesn't help that a lot of police chiefs and executives don't have the balls to stand up and say, no, that's not what happened. Because if people just stepped up from the beginning, and listen, say the situation's wrong, the police chief came out day one and said the officer was wrong because he was, it ends things. If he comes out and says the officer wasn't wrong and this is the reasons why, tactically, this, that, the other guy presented, it'd be over with. But nobody comes out and informs the public, so the public starts stirring. You have the media start adding things, and it turns into bad situations where the public hates the cops are afraid to deal with the public, and it's not good.
What do you think we can do to address the problem of those bad cops?
Listen, what people don't understand is the majority of the complaints that come through behind the scenes are from other cops calling on other cops. Officers every single day nationwide are being suspended behind the scenes, modified behind the scenes, which means taking their gun and shield away from them and taking them off patrol. There's so much that people don't see that already happens. And I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, when an officer does go against the grain to the point where it's criminal, they're going to end up being suspended, have a trial, and be fired even before the trial. So to keep on saying there needs to be more, there's already over-the-top heaps and bounds against officers. Officers nowadays have one hand tied behind their back and one hand on the side of getting arrested. But the public probably doesn't know that.
Going off of that point, what would you say, what's your opinion on the recent changes in police conduct and the recent changes to like the legislation that there is within like what police can do now, like such as banning chokeholds or no-knock warrants?
So
do you think that's something? Oh,
In
sorry,
New
you
York,
go.
in New York City, what people probably didn't know is there's something called a patrol guide, which pretty much outlines what you can and cannot do because of previous incidents over the decades. Chokeholds were already banned, but I am glad to see that the president came out and signed something that for all 50 states, you cannot use it. It's out there, everyone knows, and I agree with it. But it also has to go both ways that you can't not condemn. We had an incident within the last month and a half where an individual put an officer in a chokehold, and it's not a big deal. So I've seen some people make comments saying hold them to the same standards and hold them accountable. Well, it's got to go both ways. In regards to the New York State Bail Reform Act, Governor Cuomo is completely off the wall for doing something like that because it doesn't matter if you're young or old, if you're Democrat, Republican. Putting bad people on the street that should be behind bars is an absolute terrible idea. A lot of people are reoffending, but on top of that, not every single person that gets released from jail is going to go out there and commit a crime. Those are just facts. So people saying that every single person that gets released is going to reoffend, that's an asinine statement because it's not true. Some people just want to go on the right side of the law and learn their lesson. But what it's doing is there's a lot of young kids, late teens to late 20s, that are going out there and seeing this. And I believe that's a reason for the uptick in shootings that you're seeing all throughout New York City. Because they feel that unless you pretty much murder someone, and that's what the New York State Bail Reform Act is, you're let back out on the street. And that's not good. There's been plenty of people that have been rapists that go back out on the street and within a week of getting out are re-raping other victims. That's wrong. In regards to the diaphragm bill, which says that any officer, even unintentional, that goes out there and puts their hand or some type of force on someone's front or back, that's a completely terrible idea. Because being out there firsthand, and a person that just shot somebody or robbed somebody or beat somebody up is not going to stop just because you're wearing a uniform and say, you know what, officer, bring me to jail. They're going to struggle, they're going to resist, and like I said earlier, any type of martial arts, you're taught to take someone down to the ground. You're going to end up on somebody's torso at some point. And with this bill, even unintentional, you can get arrested for at least a misdemeanor, which is completely off the wall.
Do you think, to some degree, that officers should be held accountable for the force that they may inflict on someone?
I never said that officers shouldn't be held accountable, but like I said earlier, the public isn't understanding that officers in all 50 states and all over the world go through a physical training course and are taught that if something gets raised, if you and me square off and I'm presenting, that I'm going to punch you in the face, well, what's the officer going to do? Are they going to put their hands behind their back and let you punch them? No. So they're going to use the same force, if not a little more. That's when you have less lethal and non-lethal force. You can go to your pepper spray. You can go to your expandable baton. You can go to a taser. But all this is trained. Officers aren't just taking upon themselves and being mobs of the old school Italians that are just beating people up for no reason. On the adverse effect, if an officer just jumps out of a car and somebody is being very respectful and out of nowhere the officer slaps them or punches them or uses some kind of force which is completely unacceptable, absolutely that officer should be held accountable and probably lose their job. But we have to use common sense also. You can't condemn an officer because somebody presented force against them that didn't want to go to jail. That's not the way it works.
So, in terms of, those comments, would you say there was a quote from the former Dallas police chief, David Brown, that was saying that we're asking cops to do too much in this country and that police were not meant to solve all of these problems? What do you have to say about that? Do you think that there should be
I agree.
other forms of... Sorry, yeah, no, you go.
I absolutely agree. Officers are asked to do so much stuff. You're asked to go to EMS jobs. You're asked to be social workers, work with disputes between landlords and tenants. There are some situations that I do believe that could be handled by other units, but the problem is what happens when that situation turns bad. There's a very fine line. If all of a sudden we allow social workers or Department of Buildings to go and say landlord-tenant disputes, but then a landlord-tenant, one of them pulls out a knife or punches the other guy or hits him in the head with a bat, you're still going to call the police. So the problem is because officers have handled these situations for so long, it's already in the back of these individuals' minds that they're going to call the cops. So I do agree with it. I don't know how we would transition. It would take a very long time. Is it possible? Yes. But I think people have it in their minds that at the end of the day, call the cops. And it's going to be difficult to transition from not having a police officer show up to handle a situation.
Do you think that there should be other people responding to situations such as like social workers?
When it comes to incidents where kids are involved, like ACS, absolutely. They've been doing it for years. There's nothing wrong with it. A lot of probation officers are on the kind of on both sides, where they're kind of social workers, kind of law enforcement. There's nothing wrong with that, and it'll continue to happen. And there's no reason why you can't be supportive of trying it. But you just have to be understanding that things could go bad and you could have more victims because of it. It doesn't mean it can't work. It's just going to be difficult to transition.
Yeah. So last year alone, New York City spent $5.9 billion on their police and only spent $988 million on youth and community programs and $382 million on job programs. Would you say that there are some, people that when they make those claims about defunding to the police, that they have kind of, it relates to what you were saying before about switching those gears towards sending out other people? Do you think that there should be more money geared towards that when people call to defund the police?
I like how you just brought that up because my opinion, I'm going to take away my experience as a police officer. I believe that schools should have a ton more funding. I don't like the idea that they've taken away, like you said, it's only 988 million or whatever it was for schools. That's the problem. I believe when we were younger, we had so many other options, whether it was schools, whether it was plays getting involved in, whether it was music. But they don't have that for these kids. And that's a problem because a lot of kids come from low-income neighborhoods. I came from a low-income neighborhood. My parents didn't own a house. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad didn't make a ton of money. But I was able to do stuff after school. And I believe that when you give kids the opportunity to be around other kids in a positive setting and not just throw them to the wolves and put them on the street, you're going to decrease their chances of getting into trouble. When you take away programs and the kids, the parents are busting their butts to try to support their children, they're not home, they tend to hang out with knuckleheads. When you hang out with knuckleheads, bad things happen. When bad things happen, the cops are called. When the cops are called, you have these incidents that we see on TV. And on the newspaper. So if we're able to listen, I would put way more money. You'd have to sit down, of course, and see what costs what we could bring in, what you can cut down. But I absolutely believe that schools citywide, starting from a low age, not K, but I would probably start somewhere in the first grade up, especially through high school, need more funding to be able to have opportunities. In regards to New York City, for instance, defunding $1 billion, terrible move. I believe you probably could have taken money away, absolutely, to the extent of $1 billion. I think that's really crazy. For instance, our mayor of New York City, his wife spent $1 billion for a program called Thrive that has shown zero results, that pretty much just gave people paychecks and has done nothing for the mental health community of the people that need it most. That's wrong. I felt in my 15 years and being a New York City resident and watching the towers burn on 9/11, we have gotten so far away from counterterrorism and taking funding away for God forbid it happens again, that this city is in a state that it hasn't probably seen in the last 20 years. And that's wrong. But I do agree that there are tons of money. There's millions of dollars that you probably could have taken away, which would have been fine. Whether it's through cutbacks, attrition, whether it's just taking money away and reallocating it. But $1 billion is crazy, especially when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to a lot of policing nowadays. It's changed a lot for me in 15 years also. It's less enforcement and more investigative. So there's a lot of programs behind the scenes, and anybody that's a tech person understands that a lot of programs cost a ton of money, especially with a police department of over 30,000 people. These companies charge so much money, but that's the direction that policing has gone. Also, you hear all the time, more training for officers. That's perfectly okay. But training, there was a training after the incident with Michael Brown, Blue Courage. They had that in all 50 states. That was millions upon millions of dollars to train every single cop, but you just took that away. So how do you expect to train cops if you're not giving them the money in order to supply that training? It's almost an oxymoron. So, like I said, I do agree that money absolutely could have been cut, but to the extent of $1 billion in New York City, not a good idea.
How much money do you think could be cut?
See, that's very difficult to say because especially being the mayor or the comptroller, you have to sit down and look through every single program. Because like I said, it's not just programs such as the NYPD or police departments. Thrive Alone, if you looked at that and that program wasn't in existence, that to my knowledge hasn't helped a ton of people, that $1 billion that was taken from there could have been spread out to many different programs. Listen, I'm very big into the blue collar worker, not just police departments, but what about the sanitation? Sanitation workers break their butts, and all those people, teachers. They deserve it. They have one of the hardest jobs in the world dealing with these young kids. But no one talks about, helping the teachers out either. So it's a problem. Like I said, it's hard for me not being in New York politician or especially the mayor and have that stuff in front of me. But absolutely 100% there's ways of cutting from certain areas that are not producing and moving them to other areas.
Is there anything that you think that you guys as a Blue Lives Matter organization could do to help contribute to those other organizations?
We've definitely helped other organizations. What I would really love to do is help out much, much more with the community, people that want to join together, people that want to make a difference. I think people always say in regards to police being trained, and I get it, but I think the public needs to be brought in more also. Years ago, you had ride-alongs. People got to see firsthand what officers experienced. Those were cut down. There should be scenarios, not just sitting down and having someone come off the street and sit in a classroom, because that gets boring. But bring people in and say, you know what, we're going to give you a paint gun or, the soap bullets. There's a FATS machine, which is a pretty much big electronic machine, which allows you to run scenarios on shoot or don't shoot, use of lethal force, and show people firsthand. Listen, we're gonna show you. You don't agree with the situation at hand, or you have some discrepancies on why officers act a certain way. We're gonna have you run through a situation that's typical, and we're gonna talk about it, and you tell us what you see now if it's a different view. Do that, and it would cost the public zero money. That's where funds can also come from, to educate the public as well, because if the police don't understand what's going on in the community, how can the police talk about a situation? How can they go into a community of color when you've never been there before? But vice versa, how can you expect a person in a community to understand a police officer if they haven't seen that side? So we need more of that. Too many politicians are running their mouths and there's zero action. It's just rallying people up, screaming and yelling, not helping the situation, but then the people that are misinformed are listening to them. And that's all they understand. And it just causes this divide. And until people sit down with an open mind, willing to actually speak and not yell at one another, nothing's going to get solved.
So recently, you guys have been making headlines for your plans to make a Blue Lives Matter mural outside of the New York City Police headquarters. Can you tell us a little bit about that motivation to make that and why you think that there needs to be a Blue Lives Matter mural outside?
So if you've ever had the I guess pleasure or honor of going into headquarters, as soon as you walk in Manhattan, there's something called the Hallway of Heroes. When you look around, there's the names of every single officer throughout the institution of the NYPD that has been killed in the line of duty. It would be incredible to walk outside of headquarters in the frozen zone and have a roadway of heroes for the people walking by on the other side of the fence, for the family members coming to ceremonies to see a beautiful mural which has them remember and know that other people are thinking about their loved one. To have officers go in and out of that building of all different ranks to boost morale, because morale's at an all-time low. And something that simple, just being able to walk by something like that can just boost your spirits and re-energize you. That would be special, and that's the reason why.
Do you feel that in any way it's, a direct adaptation of the Black Lives Matter murals that have been painted across cities in America?
You know what it is? It's nothing actually against that organization, because I believe that that organization should voice their opinions and bring to concerns whatever they believe. There's nothing wrong with that. They believe in that. We believe in this. But, in a positive note on their end, they possibly did end up being the voice to lead to other groups, not just police officers. There's groups such as the LGBT community that have suffered a lot of hardship and discrimination throughout the ages. You've had the Jewish community that was pretty much enslaved and thrown to concentration camps to die in human homemade ovens. There's been so many different people that really may and should be able to also be able to voice their concerns and bring to light certain things. Now, maybe there's an option, I know that there is, of temporary, murals and things like that, to the fact of maybe it's for 6 months or something along the lines of that. So, you know what I mean? I think this could be a good thing and a trend setting for all people going forward.
Do you think that in any way that your mural would upset people that are part of the Black Lives Matter movement and feel that their message is being detracted?
You know, that's the problem with New York City and the nation right now. People came to Ellis Island many decades ago because they got away from persecution from where they came from to make a better life. It didn't matter what your nationality was or what you believed in or what you looked like. They had an equal playing ground, right? Now you hear what you just said a lot, a lot. I hear that a lot. Well, what do you think about the other side? Well, the problem is we have a constitution. And if one person believes in something, we shouldn't knock somebody else and try to say, well, you're taking away from me. I want the spotlight on me. We should either work together to help one another or just be grateful and happy that other people want to inspire the world and show them their point of view. We can't just say, well, how do you feel about this or how do you feel about that? Because you're taking away from everyone else's beliefs. So I think if we could just get on the page and respect one another and let each individual group or person be able to express themselves in a positive light within reasonable means, I think we need to focus more on that.
Do you think that in any way there's some people that say that the two organizations, Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, can't peacefully coexist? Do you think that there's a way that the two of them can coexist, or do you think that they're too different from each other and that they're two different ideologies?
Listen, we can absolutely coexist, but I'm going to give you a little fact, and people can look it up for all the viewers. A couple months ago, the Staten Island Advance reached out to me, and they tried baiting me a little bit because that's what some reporters try doing. But what I said is this is probably at the beginning of all the riots, and not too long after George Floyd, the incident with George Floyd. And I said, because they had to connect to Black Lives Matter, I said, why don't we come together and show the world in New York City, the pinnacle, that we're not so different. That when we put our hearts together and we're genuine, we can make a positive difference. And let's hold a candlelight vigil in New York City for Mr. Floyd. Let's come together and let's start working things out. And for the most part, that group pretty much told me to go F myself. So we have to start saying, we have to stop saying, well, do people want to come together? Yes, of course. You know, certain people, like-minded people, people that really want change are going to work together. But there's a lot of groups that behind the scenes don't want change. They stand in front of a camera and say they want it. But when they're offered help and they're offered to the fact to come together, they don't want it because it takes away from their cause. Because if they're not rallying people up, they're not getting their point across, and that's wrong. So of course, and take me away from the president of Blue Lives just as an individual with a lot of inspirations in the future, someone that loves New York City and wants to see people start moving forward because we've fallen behind. I would love to work with any group that wants to make a positive change, but we have to stop making excuses for people that don't want to come to the table, that don't want to take accountability for opportunities in front of them, and stop making excuses on why certain groups can go out there and do bad things and not be held accountable when it is possible that you can come to the table and start fixing things.
So you bring up the murder of George Floyd. This is a question from our CEO, Mark. How do you think, what are your feelings towards the handling of the George Floyd situation?
Listen, I think for the first time in American history, possibly the police and the community came together and agreed that what was seen that day was atrocious. It was completely wrong and the officers needed to be held accountable. Now there's a completely different side, which is going to throw a lot of wrenches into the mix, which maybe people don't want to hear or don't believe in. But I'm not a Minnesota police officer. I don't know what their protocols are. I did a little research, and there are certain things that are going to be shady, which may hurt the case, which officers were taught to do. There was body cam footage which shows from the get-go that Mr. Floyd did show up to an establishment. A 911 call was made because no matter if it was a small or a large crime, misdemeanor or felony, he committed a crime that a bodega owner or worker called for, right? The officers were called. Now, on body cam footage from the get-go, before the officers even put their hands on Mr. Floyd, you could tell he was under the influence of something. Now, by the way, what I'm saying, I'm just going off of what happened factually. I'm not going off of opinion. I'm not taking sides because at the end of the day, I think what happened was completely atrocious. But you see the body cam footage when they're putting him in the car and being very respectful. He's saying he can't breathe before anything happened. He actually asked the police officers to put him on the ground. That's him saying it. Now, I don't agree with how they handled the situation. I think in New York, especially being a supervisor, I would have held it completely different. But I can't judge the cops, but I'm also not agreeing with how it was handled. So, you know, I think that perspective was completely wrong. No one deserves to lose their life in police custody. But we also don't know what's going to come out, you know, when the jury happens. And I can't comment on that part because I'm not part of the legal system.
Right. But in terms of those police officers that stood by and did nothing, what do you have to say about the conduct of those police officers?
You know what? It really sucks, but because some of those officers, to my understanding, weren't even on a week, and I guess, and I can't speak for them, but it just seems like they may have been going off of the senior officer at the time. Which, listen, there's many different things to do. Tap somebody on the shoulder, pull them back. But like I said, throwing the wrench into the situation, Minnesota Police Department allows that tactic that Chauvin used. I don't agree with it. I'm not justifying it by any means, but that throws the wrench in because at the time, they were taught to use that tactic. So it's going to be, I don't know. I don't agree with it. I don't believe. Listen, first of all, anyone says they can't breathe, you get them up and you sit them up and you call for an ambulance. That's just the way I'm taught. I'm speaking on behalf of me. I'm not speaking on behalf of the police department. I just overall don't agree how that was handled whatsoever, and I feel it could have been preventable, but I also don't know the side of the medical terms that even if he was sitting up, if what he ingested drug-wise would have still affected him. I don't know that aspect. But like I said, I do not agree with how it was handled at all.
Right. Do you think that as a result from seeing the conduct of certain police officers throughout the summer, specifically with the case of George Floyd, that there needs to be some sort of retraining and sort of a reframing of what exactly the police are allowed to do in situations like that?
See, what you just said is a problem that we hear all the time. Everything right off the bat is, well, what about the police? What about their training? Well, we've also seen throughout all the states, especially Portland, Seattle, and New York, not including Los Angeles, Chicago. What about the individuals going out there and illegally protesting, going out there and rioting, breaking windows, stealing things, fighting the cops, throwing bottles, disrespecting them? It goes both ways, and there's only so much training that you can give somebody. It's not always the training of the police officer because the quote unquote training that people want is for officers to put their hands behind their back and just let people run rampant. But yet there's no accountability for the other side that's going out there and causing havoc. About a month and a half to 2 months ago, there was the Brooklyn Bridge incident where me on the other side, I saw the actual footage of the police officers and what happened. Those people were completely out of control, and the march that was held that day was set up by people of the clergy, people of churches from all different religions that were marching across the bridge singing prayers. But yet there's an other side called the quote unquote peaceful protesters, which were nothing but peaceful. And there's no demand for those individuals to be held accountable. There's no demand for those individuals to be put in jail and be able to suffer the consequences for what they did on that day, where a lieutenant with 25 years on had his eye socket broken, where you had Chief Monahan, the highest ranking uniformed police officer, injured that day, where you had a lieutenant hit over the head with a metal pipe or a bat and split open. So we never hear about the other side having to be quote unquote trained or go to courses or be held accountable. And all we hear are the police officers. And that's kind of what I'm referring to earlier, where right off the bat it's police brutality and it's not police action. So we have to start changing that mindset because it pits the police against the community, and that's not helping anything.
When you say that you think that there's training that people on the other side, so people that are civilians, should take, those are people that don't take a vow to, uphold the law and enforce the law. So do you think that there's a difference?
There is no difference because officers are going to be trained no matter what, but we can't make excuses on why the other side is allowed to go out there and create complete havoc. And the second those same individuals are creating havoc and they get locked up or in a confrontation with a police officer, all of a sudden it's poor them. If we look at City Hall area in downtown Manhattan, the amount of graffiti that was put on those sidewalks, on those beautiful buildings, and yet not one person was held accountable. The one time that they went to go arrest an individual, I believe it was a female, who was seen on police camera on 5 different incidents defacing New York City property, and the second officers arrested that individual, it was, oh my God, how could they do that? And this is the state we're living in, where we're making excuses for the criminals, and the second an officer who swore to take an oath enforces the Constitution and the laws of that area, they're the demons, and that's wrong. So like I said, we have to have an open mind. I don't know where we got to the point where it's okay to go out there and create havoc, and it's okay, where you're in jail for a couple hours and released on a ticket, and then you just disappear and never go back. That's wrong, and this doesn't just affect one group of people. This doesn't just affect a Republican or a Democrat. We got to put that aside and really bring together the law and order and the public safety of individuals, because what the average person doesn't realize, and this is where Mayor Giuliani was so great, is when you stop the small stuff, they're afraid to go out there and do bigger things. But when you allow them to do small things, it turns into bigger things. It turns into committing more and bigger crimes. And that's an issue, and we need to get back to that, not just in New York City, but the other states as well.
What has your organization done in response to the things that have happened this summer and the culture and climate that's changed throughout the United States?
You know what? It's not necessarily that my organization went out there and got political and tried to change too many things, but what we did in the process was there was actually a multiracial couple. They've been married many years. They have two young kids. The husband's white. The wife, I believe, is African American, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I believe, in March. And we went out there and we ended up raising $27,000 for his wife, who's been in Texas undergoing chemo treatment, to be able to offset what's been going on with that family. And that's what the organization's about. It's about doing good things. And like I said, it's about remembering the fallen officers and helping officers and their families diagnosed with life-threatening diseases.
So, although, you are an organization that stands for Blue Lives and, represents a very polarizing topic right now in the United States, you think that, although, responding in that way, would you say that that's enough right now? And that's, what have people's response been in terms of that?
You know what's really cool? A lot of people who hear the name right off the bat, even if they start off on the other side, like, oh my God, they're such pieces of garbage, how dare they? But when I'm able to talk one-on-one with somebody and they see the type of person I am and the genuineness that really comes off of me, by the end of the conversation, as long as the person is willing to meet me halfway, even myself, you learn things about the other side, and at the end of the conversation, you ever say, wow, you know what, we didn't know that. We can move in a positive direction. Or you say, you know what, this was a cool conversation. That person really isn't as bad, and I understand where they're coming from. And that's special. That's when change happens, when people are able to understand one another and give that person that respect to be heard, is when it's the most meaningful to me. And I look forward to more of those conversations.
In what ways do we think that, the conversation that's going right now in the country can be had with other people? And how do you think that it would change if we did have those conversations? Do you think that people would be able to agree?
You know what? It's not even necessarily agreeing. You don't always have to agree with somebody, but you really should respect them. That's number one. Number two is I think the facts have to be revealed. We hear all the time, well, blacks are just black individuals are just killed by police officers. They're murdered. That's not true. Factually, every single year, whites around the nation, for whatever reason it doesn't get picked up by the media, are killed at a higher rate. Normally 150 people more per year, whites are killed over blacks. Now, I'm not justifying that. I'm not saying now also you don't know what led to those situations during a police interaction. But white individuals are killed at a much higher rate every single year than any other nationality. Another thing that hurts too is we saw, I think this last week, that poor little boy that was in the front of his house, forgot what state it was, riding his bicycle, and a person of color went out there and just ran up to him and shot him in his head on his front lawn playing with his sisters. That's wrong. But if you reversed it and that individual was a white individual who did it to a person of color, suddenly the media would be in complete outrage and say what a piece of garbage and go in front of the guy's house and burn down his house. That's wrong. We have to take away what the person looks like and get to the basics and say what's wrong is wrong. Stop pitting people of color against people of non-color. Stop pitting people of one religion against another. We need to start giving real facts. We have to let individuals make their own decisions on what's really happening. We can't just brainwash people and make it seem like one is more wrong than the other. What's wrong is wrong at the end of the day. I had an interview, I think last week, about a person, and they're trying to tell me that slavery of one group was worse than slavery of another. And I said, that's wrong. That's creating bias and racism, because slavery is wrong no matter what, no matter who you were. Slavery in general was just completely off the wall and should have never happened. And us putting certain groups ahead of others when it's the same thing, slavery is slavery, you can't do that. You have to be able to let people go out there and make the determination on their own instead of brainwashing them and making them be pitted against another group.
So when you say those things about, white people being killed more than black people in the United States by police officers, does that, how does that factor in to the population of white people versus African American people in the United States? Because when you bring up those topics, about African American people, they make only about 13% of the population, yet they're still accounted for about half of the people that are being incarcerated right now.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you what type of neighborhood do you predominantly live in?
What neighborhood do I predominantly live in?
Yeah, like the geographical, the ethnic group of people where you live. What are they? What is their background, pretty much?
White.
Okay, so let's just say I'm a
But I'd say
police
that goes
officer
for
in
most
your
of the
area.
United States,
That's not true. But
right?
what we'll say is I'm a police officer that's working in your area, right? So you just said that the majority of people are white. So the majority of calls of complainants that call up are going to give the description of a white individual. Now, if I'm patrolling in your area and I'm stopping that individual from the call that I was given, I'm doing it because of the geographical location of the people that live there. Now, let's go on my behalf. When I first started off, I'm this white officer. I'm 21 years old. I grew up in Staten Island, New York, predominantly white, um, and I get put in East New York. Now, East New York or East Flatbush is predominantly Caribbean. Now, the majority of calls of individuals that are calling on other people are predominantly people of color. So if I stop an individual, a lot of the time it's going to be because of the description I was giving. That doesn't mean that the officer is racist. They're going off of what they're being provided with. So of course, in your neighborhood, it's going to look like I'm stopping all people of whites. And in this neighborhood, it looks like I'm stopping people of color. And you could say, well, it's racist. No, it's not, because I'm stopping the people that are in that general location. And that's what the public doesn't realize a lot of the time. Now, on top of that, I'm going to go even further, and these are factual statements, and I could say this because I'm active. The majority and uptick of shooting, which I'm going to say is probably 90 to 95% factual evidence, because where I work, I see it firsthand. The shootings involve people of color between the ages of their late teens to late 20s, right? That's factual. Now, those people that are going to be arrested for those shootings are going to be people of color. But on the adverse side, whether or not they're on the right or wrong side of the law, the victims are also going to be predominantly on the people of color side as well. So we have to take into the accountability of the area, the crime, and what's going on in a particular area. We can't just say in general, well, blacks will stop more or whites will stop less. It all depends on that area. And especially nowadays, I'm going to give a fact to everyone watching, is the majority of police officers nationwide are not proactive. They're not going out there, and they're not in plain clothes like they used to be. They're not going out there making arrests unless a radio run was called. So cops are just not stopping people anymore. It's just the way it is. It's the way police departments have changed. So the crimes that are coming in are because of other people calling on them. It's reflecting in the numbers of the reports being given.
So when you say, that it hasn't been reflected in the reports being given, there's still, footage that's coming out about, police misconduct and things that are happening, or things that have happened a while ago, that are coming to the surface through like social media. Yet a lot of times in those situations, police haven't been held accountable.
That's not true at all. Police are always held accountable behind the scenes. On top of that one video that comes out that happened after a million interactions for that one day, um, that's nothing. But yet we're not talking about the minority on minority shootings and crimes that are happening in communities of color. People are saying that they want change, but nobody's going to help the people of color. No one's going to these neighborhoods and working and petitioning to say, get these low lives off the street. I don't care what you look like. I don't care if you're in a low income neighborhood or not. You deserve to feel safe. There's so many great people that work in all different neighborhoods, especially in, that live in housing developments. They're great, hardworking people, and a lot of times they live there because that's where their family's from. They may make a ton of money. That's just what they're used to, and they love that neighborhood. But they shouldn't have to suffer because we're letting hoodlums run rampant, committing crimes right outside of their doorstep. That's a problem. New York City had a 1-year-old within the last 2 months shot and killed at 11:30 at night. Shot. What does a 1-year-old baby have to do with gun violence? Where are the politicians going to those neighborhoods? Where are the so quote-unquote activists and Reverend Al Sharpton standing at 2 in the morning where this baby was shot and killed? They're not there. But yet the second you see one police officer take police action, everyone's up in arms. But yet no one cares about these communities of color behind the scenes. And that's what's messed up. We got to get to that and start fixing this. We got to have real results. We can't just talk about it. We can't always say the cops are bad, because that's not the truth. But on the other side, when a cop does do something bad that is blatant, it should be handled right away.
So for those police officers that, have done things that are bad, in terms of, say, the Breonna Taylor case, where there's only been one police officer that's been arrested. What is your opinion on that, of those police officers that aren't being held accountable for those
I
events?
I can't comment on every single situation where police officers are being, put behind bars or locked up because I don't know the full details. What I do know is being a police officer is all of the facts are not released, right? So the problem is nowadays police officers are just thrown in handcuffs and locked up, and they only tell you and show you smidgets of what's happening. They're not showing the whole thing. And then what happens is down the road, a year or two later, when it goes to court, and all of the facts come out, and it shows that, wait a minute, maybe it didn't play out the way that certain people say. Maybe there was a gun that was involved or a weapon, and we weren't told about it. Everyone's up in arms when a police officer isn't convicted. And like this goes back to early as well. If the public was informed properly by both the public officials, by the police executives, and by the media from the get-go, we wouldn't have these issues and uproars because people would know from day one the facts of what happened. But when you hide it and you lie and you manipulate it, it looks a lot worse later on when something else comes out that maybe you didn't know about.
You know, Going back to, you're talking about Breonna Taylor's, you can't really speak about that information in the due process and the facts. Although this has been a very high profile case, has this been something that you've been having discussions about with other people in Blue Lives Matter? Since this has been a very prominent case where, like, the details of this crime that took place, with this woman who was sleeping in her own bed, and, like, it was a no-knock warrant of the wrong house. Have those been discussions that you guys have been having?
Sometimes we'll talk about it, but like I said, I am not from that area, so it's not something that I was able to deal with on a personal level. Any life lost is a tragedy, whether you're on the right or wrong side of the law, absolutely. Because that person, good or bad, has a family that now has someone that's never coming home to them. The issue is a lot of people that make comments and say dumb comments and act really tough, especially behind the keyboard or social media, are the same people that if they mouthed off to a cop and committed a crime and the officer ended up grabbing them, they'd be crying in handcuffs, saying, oh, why are you putting me in handcuffs? How dare you do something like this? So these are the quality of people that a lot of times are commenting on these situations that don't know facts, that are more keyboard warriors, and need to, like I said, be informed properly from the get-go. And like I said, if it's something to the fact of if an officer just kicked in a door and killed a random person, there's no justification for that. But at the same time, there's more that goes on in policing that people don't know, that meets the eye. There's a lot of, I guess you could say, confidential informants that are behind the scenes that give a lot of information, and the majority of it is truth. There are some times that confidential informant gives false information. So there's a lot that plays into it. But like I said earlier, if you're not a police officer and you don't live that lifestyle, it's very hard to understand. I've never in my 15-year career went to any precinct, suited up, and heard any cop of any color, any gender say, I'm going to go out there today, I'm going to put on my gun belt, and I'm going to murder a certain type of person. Never happened. Never happened. And sometimes bad things happen, bad situations happen, and that's the learning curve. That's where it's like, how could it have been prevented? How can we change things? And how can we move together with the public in a positive direction?
Do you think, to some degree, like, I know earlier you were mentioning that no one hates a bad cop as much as a good cop. Do you think that the entire system should be held accountable? Because I think that's a thing that, like, a lot of the people from the Black Lives Matter movement have been upset about, is the establishment and the system as a whole. What do you think that the police can do to improve that system?
Of course, officers should be held accountable, like I said earlier as well. The public who's going out there and committing crimes and instigating and throwing bottles and pretty much presenting physical harm towards an officer need to be held accountable as well. It goes both ways. We can't just stand there and say, because you're in a blue uniform, you're a bad person and you should go to jail just because we don't like what you did. That's wrong. That's completely off the wall. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of rallies pop up in general all over the nation, because they're sick and tired of one side standing up there and just pretty much hearing them say that we want to do what we want and we don't want to get in trouble for it. We don't want to be held accountable, and we deserve, all these reparations for what happened 400 years ago. And listen, history's there for a reason. Whether you agree it or not, it's to learn. It's to know what to not to do, what to go forward, how to know that certain groups of people were discriminated against, and the right way to treat people because of the nonsense and the negativity that happened so many years ago. But we can't stand here every single time an interaction happens with a cop and say, we've been discriminated against for 400 years and we deserve this, and we have a reason why we're throwing rocks through windows and stealing from Gucci. That's a completely stupid comment. That's a stupid ideology. And those individuals that are going out there and burning police cars and hurting police officers and robbing from other store owners should go to jail. You should, because if they're looting and grabbing $1,000 Gucci, belt, and not getting caught for it, they're going to do it the next time as well, and that's wrong. When we're younger, what happened? Your mother or father would yell at you, would spank you on your butt, would slap your wrist, and going forward, you'd be afraid to do it again because you got in trouble for doing something wrong. It starts at home. That's a completely other conversation. But we're in this generation now where people think they can do what they want and get away with it and curse out the cops and tell them to go F themselves and nothing's going to happen. That they can go and punch somebody and rape somebody and shoot somebody, and God forbid a cop locks them up. How dare you? It's because of how I look. No, it's because you committed a crime and you're going to jail. That's the way it is. And that's facts, and not too many people nowadays are coming out and stating facts. They're backing off and staying quiet, and it seems like the silent majority of the loud voices are prevailing. And that's wrong, because we're setting a terrible precedent for the young people growing up.
What is your response to the trend of the hashtag ACAB, or all cops are bastards?
You know what, listen, I've seen F12 and all this crap. Listen, anybody that's putting that stuff, you're immature. It's anti-government, all this stuff. Listen, let them do what they want to do. Just don't graffiti buildings where people work hard and own stuff. You could voice your opinions, hold up your signs, put whatever you want on social media. But I hate to tell you, the people that think the cops are going to disappear one day, it's completely wrong. And it's funny because a lot of these people that hold up those signs, they F the police and all this nonsense, and the majority of them are white. The second in these protests that same individual has something bad happen to them, guess who they're calling? They're calling the cops, and suddenly they look like Puss in Boots with their open eyes nice and wide, asking for help. So, they can be critics all they want, but it is what it is, and the police officers aren't going anywhere.
To that point, there's been peaceful protesters that have denounced the unnecessary riots and violence. And would you say that in any way that it's hypocritical to say that these bad apple cops are out there, but not bad apple protesters?
We need more people like that who are protesting for the reasons they want, that are standing up saying, listen, we're here for a reason. Stop coming here and causing trouble and looping us in. I love those people. Those are the people that we need more of. And the more of them we have that actually police their own that are coming, that's what we need. That's what this is all about, to let these people who genuinely are peaceful, want to go out there and protest, they absolutely should, as long as they follow the guidelines of their state and cities. I think those are the people we need to learn from, the people that do it right. And I'd love to see more of that.
Would you say that you stand in solidarity with those peaceful protesters that are out there protesting, for Black Lives Matter?
Absolutely. They have every right to go out there and voice the concerns that they have, as long as they do it in a respectful and I don't want to say right, but respectful manner, and follow the rules and the laws. I absolutely agree with them, and I believe in them, and they should be able to do what they want to do in that sense.
What do you think that the police can do, about the problems that they're feeling, and, the fact that they're voicing their concerns about the system that oppresses them? Do you think that there's something that police can do individually for themselves or as an organization to change that perception, or actually put into action any ways that can sort of switch that perception?
Well, it's crazy when you think about it, because these pop-up protests where people are pretty much saying that they hate the cops are being protected by the police officers during each one of those rallies. So it's kind of crazy when you think about it, how it actually works, and how even the protesters need to have law enforcement there to be able to make sure that that little event or rally goes off the right way as planned. Once again, we have to, this is the conversation where too many people are getting used to, is right away it's, well, what can the cops do? What can the cops do? What can the cops do? The cops are doing a lot, and we've seen over all 50 states a lot of politicians and police leaders cower down. We saw people in uniform kneeling in all 50 states, bowing down to the mobs that were torching police cars, and the same night those people were still going out there and committing more crimes. Police officers are police officers for a reason. A lot of people aren't going to like them because they're the ones that are telling people what they can't do. They're the ones taking the rights of the people away, whether they agree or disagree with it. So once again, we got to stop getting away with what can the cops do, because that's what it is. It's we want more, we want more. Listen, cops are there to enforce the law. You swore an oath to protect the Constitution. You raised your hand. We didn't make the laws. It's our job to enforce them. If you break the law, you just have to be able to say, listen, I screwed up and I got caught. If you get away with it, God bless you. Continue to do it until you get caught. But you can't keep saying every single time, what more can the cops do? Because that's not the right way to think about this.
Why do you believe that it's the wrong way to think about it?
Because what you're doing is you're pitting the police officers against the public, pretty much saying that from the get-go the officers are wrong, and that's not true. It's not surrendering. It's if people want to come to the table and genuinely want to make a difference, let's do it. But let's not say every single time, well, what more can the cops do? Because as it is, the cops have shown more restraint and being told from higher ups not to enforce the law. They're already giving in, which people don't even see behind the scenes, which is wrong. We have to go back to the accountability on the other side as well. If you're doing something wrong, you should be held accountable. Just like the whole trophy era. Just because you show up to a game doesn't mean you get a trophy. You need to go out there and earn it. You can't just show up and feel like you got first place when you ended up last. That's not right. And it's the same thing here. Is you can't just cower down just because someone's screaming at you, telling you how bad of a person you are, and then you feel bad and say, well, you're right. That's not true. I wasn't one of the Minneapolis police officers. I didn't do anything wrong. I haven't murdered anyone. So why am I taking the same criticism as somebody thousands of miles away? That's not wrong. That's kind of like a reverse bias, reverse racism. It's because I look a certain way, you're treating me a certain way, and that's wrong.
Do you think that it has anything to do with the fact that you are a part of an organization that is a part of that system that they also are contributing to?
When you say the system, you try to make it seem like it's something negative. Being a police officer is not negative. It's as long as you do it the right way and have the great intentions and genuine intentions, it's a great, noble profession. I've met so many people from all over the world, all different backgrounds that became police officers that became my brothers and sisters because they had the same outlook as me. Police officers aren't bad. It's the same thing. When a priest touches a little boy, do people stop going to church? When a female teacher in her 30s sleeps with a 12-year-old boy, do people start sending their kids to school? No. So why all of a sudden, because one cop in Minneapolis, or let's say four of them, did something completely outrageous, why are we condemning cops in 49 other states? It's the same principle. It's not right.
A lot that's being brought up right now with the movement of the Black Lives Matter is this idea of how do we talk about it with our children. And there's been some specials. There was a CNN town hall with Sesame Street where they introduced the idea of racism and they discussed the Black Lives Matter protests. And there's been a best-selling book out right now called Anti-Racist Baby, just to give those ideas about how to speak about the Black Lives Matter movement to children. There hasn't been too much in the news about Blue Lives Matter in terms of how to speak to children about it. How do you think, as someone who's a father, how do you think that we should be discussing these problems and these ideas with our youth?
Well, first of all, we gotta tell our kids, and that's why history is so important. And so many politicians are trying to tear down history. It starts with the history books and going back and showing how certain people treated other people many years ago, and to not allow it to repeat itself, and appreciate every single person, no matter what they look like or what they believe in. But at the same time, I don't agree that major league sports teams, that multi-million-dollar businesses are going out there and funneling money to a group. Now, I'm not talking about people of color, to a group called Black Lives Matter and anyone can check me, anyone can fact check me. You go online to their website and all the money that pours in goes to the Democratic Party. Completely political. It bothers me how you have a group called Black Lives Matter that, to my knowledge, has never raised money and gone into these inner cities, to these low-income neighborhoods, and surprised the families of gunshot victims with money, with grants, with checks, with putting programs together, for instance, for driver's licenses to send young kids of color to driver schools so that they have the opportunity to get a free driver's license, to get a car, to go better themselves and get a job. I don't see Black Lives Matter going into these communities and spending money to erect new schools, to fix basketball courts. I don't see that. So we need to see the facts of what's going on. I don't think it's right. I do believe that the movement was started for the right reasons and to bring light to certain things. But to go out there and look at a website, which makes me sick, that these companies are donating all this money to a political party, the money what people don't realize, and this is facts, that money being donated is not going to the neighborhoods that need it. It's not going to help people. Now, this is another thing. I don't care if they're 18 or older. The people that may be on the wrong side of the law that are victims of gunshot wounds, whether they die or they live, that's a person that could be rehabbed, that could be a productive individual in life if someone just grabbed them aside and said, stop being a knucklehead. But these people aren't even being given the opportunities because drive-by shootings are happening and these people are losing their lives. But you don't see the Black Lives Matter movement going there to that scene and condemning it. So to go out there and teach your kid about the movement, well, are we teaching about the ideology movement, or are we talking about what's really going on? That's what we have to talk about, and that's the facts we got to present.
What do you think that can be done to change that perception, with people and, probably through the media? And what do you think that your organization could do to try to change that? Or do you think that there's any action that your organization could take to try to maybe work together with those organizations in Black Lives Matters, those people?
As I said earlier, I'm willing to work with any group. I have absolutely no issue with that. I'd actually love to. I became good friends with Chaz Palminteri, the Hollywood actor in The Bronx Tale, and he says it. Nobody's born a racist. Nobody. You're taught how to become racist, and that's a problem. Whether it starts at home, whether it starts at school, hearing one of your buddies say something stupid because they heard it from their parents, that's an issue. There's no place for racism, no matter in the workplace, whether it's just in public, sporting events. There's no place for it. And we have to learn to unteach racism. We have to start being able to look at one another as individuals, that people that want to work together. You would think by looking at the media that people of color don't get along. My son is biracial. So it's you walk through Manhattan. I remember when all this happened in 2014, I went to New Orleans, and they try to make it seem like everyone's segregated, no one gets along, but that was so diverse. It was the complete opposite. You saw people of all different nationalities getting along, holding hands, laughing. That's what we need to show. We need to show the truth. But yeah, absolutely. If I'm able to help in any way that I can, I absolutely would.
Well, do you think that there is action that you can take?
There's always action I can take, but I'm also not going to step on somebody's toes. That's what they do. There's plenty of things I want to do, and one day when I get into politics, that's when you're going to see me really make a difference, and probably more than a lot of people that you've seen in office for years. But like I said, my organization isn't supposed to be political. It's not meant to be political. It's supposed to help the families of law enforcement killed in the line of duty or diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. But if my voice, because so many people, because of this, have come to know who I am, whether they agree or disagree with what I believe in, I'm willing to help out any way I can, because at the end of the day, I'm a human being. I'm an American, and I want to see not just my city, but all the cities start flourishing in the right direction.
Right. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Before we go, we could maybe take one or two questions from the users, but we'll see if there's anything that people have to ask before we head out. But again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Oh, thank
it's
you.
really been incredible.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll wait just maybe a minute to see if there's any questions that people have that they'd like to ask. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Well, it doesn't look like there's so far any questions, so I will call it there. But thank you again. I apologize for the technical difficulties in the beginning.
No problem. I appreciate you for having me.
You took so much time out of your day to speak with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. It was really great to have this conversation through our platform and highlight those voices that we don't really get.
Thank you so much. It went great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.